Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Efrem Graham. Ahead today, could the U.S. be hit by a tough flu season this year, plus another round of COVID? Concerns the country could be fighting two major viruses at the same time.
There's always the risk of something along the lines of what's been called a twindemic at times, and that's when a very strong flu season would be paired with a strong, COVID peak during the flu season as well.
It's raised worries hospitals might be swamped with patients. Confusion in Israel over where the U.S. really stands on a new version of the Iran nuclear deal, with the Biden administration for it, but members of both parties in Congress against it.
In terms of the Iran nuclear agreement, there will be bipartisan opposition.
We'll bring you the story from Jerusalem. Amidst the talk that former President Donald Trump could be indicted over his possession of classified government documents, our conversation with constitutional law expert Alan Dershowitz on a possible indictment and the FBI's raid on the Trump estate.
So the search was far too broad, especially when a subpoena could have sufficed.
And hope for those with Alzheimer's through a program that treats symptoms of that dreaded disease.
What he does is identify and address every person's contributor to their symptoms. It's just plain old common sense, and my experience shows me that it works.
How this program has given people a new lease on life. Those stories and more today on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin this half hour with concerns the U.S. could be hit this year with a twindemic, a serious flu season at the same time as another round of COVID. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson shows us the possibility these two diseases could strike at once and how you can protect yourself.
The U.S. may soon enter an unusually severe flu season, one that starts earlier than most and hits children especially hard. Our flu season generally follows what happens in the southern hemisphere, which is just now finishing its most severe in 5 years. This go-round is characterized by an early onset, which tends to make it worse, and kids aged 5 to 9 had the highest rates of infection, followed by children 4 and under.
So if you look at Australia, for example, they are just completing their winter months as we up in the northern part of the planet start to enter into fall and winter. And so what we gleaned from that is we're able to tell what kind of a flu season awaits us by looking at what happened down there.
Last year, the world saw very little flu, and the year before, almost none at all, possibly due to isolating and masking to avoid COVID. This year, though, more people are resuming pre-pandemic activities.
In the United States, up to 30,000 people die a year from the flu. And they're usually very elderly, people that have underlying medical conditions, or the very young.
Doctors recommend a flu shot, ideally before Halloween, as the best way to avoid the flu or suffering severe complications. It takes full effect after a couple of weeks and lasts about 6 months.
You want to be protected even at the tail end of the flu season, which might be March or April of 2023.
Speaking of vaccines, a new COVID booster is available that's touted to be more effective against the Omicron variants.
All previous evidence with regards to co-vaccinating with the COVID vaccines and influenza vaccines show there was no side effect or no ill effect of doing them both at the same time. So we would assume that would be the trend that continues with a newer version of a COVID vaccine.
Despite these measures, the U.S. could see a spike in both viruses.
There's always the risk of something along the lines of what's been called a twindemic at times, and that's when a very strong flu season would be paired with a strong, COVID peak during the flu season as well.
In that case, hospitals could become overwhelmed.
a higher amount of ICU bed utilization. There's a lot more folks coming into the emergency departments and overwhelming that. Patients on ventilators, canceling elective surgeries so that you can manage the amount of patients that are being hospitalized.
Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Faith leaders and media experts are sounding an alarm over a new animated show about a woman who mates with Satan and produces the Antichrist. The show is called Little Demon, and it airs on FXX Network, which is owned by Disney. The promotional language for Little Demon showcases the disturbing themes and images embedded in the show: violence, paganism, and satanic storylines cloaked in attempted comedy. The actress who plays the mother in the show says, "I love that we are normalizing paganism. Laura is a pagan. She is a witch." You can find out more about the controversy over the show at cbnnews.com. Turning right now to the Middle East, mixed messages are coming from America on renewing an Iranian nuclear deal, and they're both confusing and frustrating for Israel. The Biden administration says the best way to keep an eye on the Iranian regime is by signing the deal, while visiting congressmen from both parties see another path. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl brings us this story from Jerusalem.
The U.S. believes a diplomatic approach is the best solution to this ongoing conflict with Iran, according to U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Tom Nides.
We would like to obviously extend the JCPOA, but under the terms that the Biden administration has laid out. We get into greater details of that later, but certainly it's an important thing that we care about deeply.
Nides told foreign journalists that President Biden would not tolerate a nuclear Iran.
The president has articulated many times we will not stand by to let the Iranians obtain a nuclear weapon. And the president has articulated this both to Prime Minister Lapid and to the leadership of this government, that we will not tie Israel's hands to defend itself against Iranian aggression.
Supporters of re-entering the 2015 deal believe the original agreement effectively restrained Iran's nuclear capabilities, although military intelligence reports and UN inspectors have refuted that conclusion. A visiting bipartisan delegation of U.S. senators and congressmen stated opposition to any Iranian nuclear agreement.
In terms of the Iran nuclear agreement, there will be bipartisan opposition. It will be up to the administration as to whether or not they should enter into the agreement.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says he and Democrat Senator Bob Menendez have put forth a different plan.
Senator Menendez and myself have offered an alternative to the JCPOA, allowing Iran and Sunni Arab nations to have nuclear power, but all their enrichment would be done outside the region, so you wouldn't have to worry about nuclear proliferation.
Menendez says any agreement must pass congressional review. If it does, he and Graham want additional legislation that would subject Iran to continuing reviews. And he says the International Atomic Energy Agency should investigate and draw a conclusion about undeclared Iranian sites.
That conclusion, I think, would only lead us to the fact that Iran did seek to produce nuclear weapons. They lied to the world. And now the question is, how do you frame their march forward?
Both the senators and ambassador agree that U.S. support for Israel is unwavering.
All of us believe it's a good investment in America's national security to have a strong and capable Israel. So no matter the outcome of the election, there's not going to be any major change in support for Israel, no matter who is in charge of the House and the Senate.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, with the growing talk, the Justice Department may indict former President Donald Trump. We're going to hear from constitutional expert Alan Dershowitz about how the government has acted and whether an indictment may be on the way. We're going to have that interview when we come back. Stay with us. Well, former President Donald Trump may face possible indictment over his possession of classified government documents. One of his former attorneys says he doesn't expect it will happen. Appearing on this week's episode of The Global Lane, constitutional law scholar Alan Dershowitz says while the Justice Department may possess enough evidence against the former president, the DOJ acted unjustifiably when it sent FBI agents on a raid of Trump's home.
The FBI's recent raid on Trump's Mar-a-Lago home and the search for and seizure of classified documents, was that justified, legal in your opinion?
It was not. They should have persisted on their subpoena. They could have enforced the subpoena in court and made President Trump turn over the 15 or so boxes. But instead, they decided to engage in a very widespread search, which also involved the seizure of not only classified material, but lawyer-client privilege material, executive privilege material, and probably declassified material. So the search was far too broad, especially when a subpoena could have sufficed.
I'm sure that bothers you that they also received those communications with his lawyers. I mean, that's private information.
And the Justice Department says, don't worry, trust us. We set up a team of our own Justice Department lawyers to go through it and see what's privileged. Now, imagine what would happen if one of the Justice Department lawyers on the team read a email that said lawyer-client privilege, absolutely privileged, confidential, but it had some really juicy stuff about Trump that would destroy his chance of ever winning the presidency again. Do you think that wouldn't get leaked? Does anybody in the world believe that that would remain confidential? But if these rules continue to be applied with taint teams by the Justice Department, the lawyer-client privilege will be completely disabled.
Liberals think Trump should be prosecuted for his actions on January 6th. You believe his speech that day was protected by the First Amendment. Explain that.
Well, I think his speech was wrong. I wish he hadn't given it. I think it was a provocation. Although he used the words peacefully and patriotically, I think he should have understood that there were some who might misunderstand it. But the Brandenburg Principle, the case in the Supreme Court on free speech involving a Nazi Klansmen who advocated violence against African Americans. The Supreme Court said that was constitutionally protected. This is even a clearer case.
And your reputation was damaged by some members of the media who accepted as fact sexual allegations made against you. There's no presumption of innocence until proven guilty. So why didn't you get a fair shake from the media?
Well, I don't need a presumption of innocence. I have an absolute proof of innocence. I have the accuser's own lawyer, the accuser who's made lie after lie, the accuser who's accused George Mitchell, Ed Barak, Bill Richardson, Al Gore, Bill Clinton. He's accused everybody in the world, and the evidence is all to the contrary. I had the former head of the FBI do an analysis, and he concluded that I was right and she was wrong. So I don't want to operate under a presumption of innocence. I am factually, absolutely innocent. I never met the woman, never heard of her, certainly never touched her, certainly never had sex with her. During the relevant time period that I knew Jeffrey Epstein, I've had sex. Wonderful, wonderful woman, my wife. We just celebrated our 36th anniversary.
Well, congratulations on that. And I can't let you go without asking you about the Supreme Court, because I know you opposed the court's decision striking down Roe versus Wade, but you don't think Democrats should respond by packing the court with more left-leaning justices. Tell us about that.
Well, I'm totally opposed to court packing. It would just start a cycle of every time one party controlled, they would pack the court more with their own justices. It will end up with a Supreme Court that would have to meet in Yankee Stadium. There'd be so many justices. I do think that the Supreme Court overreached in the case in which they overruled Roe versus Wade. That issue wasn't really presented to them. The issue was whether or not the Mississippi statute, which precluded abortions after 15 weeks, was unconstitutional. So the Supreme Court could simply have decided that case, as Chief Justice Roberts said they should have, and that was the side that I was on.
So how do you think we get beyond all this, Professor Dershowitz? We're in this era now where you have to join the tribe and be part of the tribe and have the group think, as you mentioned. How do we get beyond that and get back to reasonable dissertation and dialogue and debate?
It's going to be very hard to get back. I was hoping that Biden would do it. I was a strong supporter of Biden because I thought he could help unite the country. He's a compromiser by nature. It hasn't happened. I've been a little disappointed. I'm still going to vote for him again if he runs and is healthy. But nonetheless, I'm disappointed that he hasn't done a better job in uniting the country.
And you're right that most Americans are right in the center. And so we see the shifting of the pendulum. Do you think we're ever going to get back to this?
I hope so. We've been through this before during the McCarthy period, during the anti-Vietnam period, and we've gotten back. This is perhaps the worst that I've ever seen. And the danger is the hard left is so intolerant and so totalitarian in its mindset. And they're the teachers of our future leaders. And so I worry much more about the totalitarian mindset of the hard left than I do about the totalitarian mindset of the hard right, which also exists. Both are wrong, but the left today is more dangerous than the right.
And we could go on and on. I'm sure even talk about what's happening on campus. I know you're concerned about that. But the new book, your 50th, by the way, is The Price of Principle: Why Integrity is Worth the Consequences. Professor Alan Dershowitz, thank you for taking the time to share your insights with us. We appreciate it.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Also on tonight's Global Lane program, Dershowitz explains why he defended former President Donald Trump against impeachment and how he has paid a price for choosing principle over partisanship. And too good to be true, will the government's prescription drug reduction plan really provide lower costs for seniors? We'll explore. You can see these stories and more on the Global Lane this evening at 8:30 Eastern. You can find it on the CBN News channel or on the CBN News app. Still ahead, it's one of the most dreaded diseases of all, Alzheimer's. It has devastating effects for both victims and their loved ones. But now there is some good news about ways to potentially reverse those horrible symptoms. We're going to show those to you right after this. It's called the long goodbye. Alzheimer's disease robs victims of their memories, their relationships, even their sense of self. It slowly steals their life long before their heart stops beating. But what if there was a way to reverse the symptoms of Alzheimer's? Turns out there is. Here again is medical reporter Lori Johnson with some very good news.
A number of Alzheimer's patients are describing how they regained their memory after starting the Bredesen protocol. It's not a drug. Instead, it's a number of lifestyle changes, including diet, exercise, and much more, each designed to address the approximately 40 different causes of Alzheimer's.
As you can imagine, I was terrified.
9 years ago, after Julie Gregory got lost on a very familiar road, she soon learned she had Alzheimer's.
I have lived in this town in the foothills of Georgia for 20 years, and I would run into people in shops who knew me very well, and Lori, I had no idea who they were. My personality began to change.
Julie also learned no cure or viable treatment exists for the disease.
I even contemplated ending my own life. And I think prayer brought me to the point where I realized what I was learning from mainstream medicine just wasn't true. I began to believe in this voice that was telling me there was something I could do.
She tried the Bredesen protocol, got back to normal, and has stayed there ever since.
What he does is identify and address every person's contributor to their symptoms. It's just plain old common sense, and my experience shows me that it works.
Sally Weinrich tells a similar story.
I forgot to pick up my grandchildren twice, one morning in the morning for school, within a month period of time.
5 years ago, Sally also considered suicide after experiencing the unmistakable signs of Alzheimer's.
I had 2 relatives die from it, really 3 relatives died from it, on both sides of my family. I knew I was at risk for it. I had a dread for it.
She believes God led her to Dr. Dale Bredesen.
I had all of the Dr. Bredesen's causes of Alzheimer's, and I think in my case, my Alzheimer's would have progressed very rapidly.
Instead, the opposite happened.
The best thing about my Alzheimer's today is I have answers for it, and I have reversed it. It is wonderful. I love life. I enjoy life.
Sally, Julie, and 5 others describe their amazing reversals in The First Survivors of Alzheimer's, how patients recovered life and hope in their own words.
They gave their specific protocols because they are personalized. Here's what each person did, how they did it, what their workarounds were, etc.
Over 2,000 people are currently on the plan. Clinical trial results released in 2020 showed 84% of plan participants with mild cognitive impairment experienced improved cognition. 12% continued to decline, and 4% showed no change.
In the people in our trial that we recently published, we actually saw increase instead of decrease in their gray matter in their brain. So you can actually see that there's improvement not only in their test scores, but also in their MRIs.
The first step of the protocol is the so-called cognoscopy to determine a person's individual risk of cognitive decline. This involves a computer quiz to assess your mental capability, as well as a number of blood tests to identify which areas a person needs to make changes.
And often there are 10 or more, and then we target those with a precision medicine sort of approach.
For most, that involves a low-carbohydrate diet, intermittent fasting, plenty of exercise, sleep, eliminating toxic exposures, as well as hormone and nutrient balancing.
Identifying those things and addressing them is how we see these people surviving so well.
It's a lot of effort and some expense, but people like Sally and Julie say it's better than the alternative. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Coming up, new photos from NASA's James Webb Space Telescope revealing more of the beauty of God's creation. We'll take a look when we come back. Stay with us. NASA's James Webb Space Telescope has captured images of thousands of never-before-seen young stars. The pictures come from a region known as the Tarantua Nebula. The stars were previously shrouded from view by cosmic dust. The nebula is 161,000 light years from Earth. NASA says it is the home of the hottest and the most massive stars we know. And as the Bible says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Time now for your Thursday Thankful. I hope you'll join me in this prayer of gratitude. Lord, thank you for being oh so faithful. Your goodness follows me, pursuing me until the very end. And for this, my God, I am grateful. There is no greater love. With that prayer, I hope you'll make this a Thursday that is filled with thanksgiving from start to finish. That's going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can always find more of our programs on the CBN News channel. You can also find them online at cbnnews.com at any time. Let us know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We certainly would love to hear from you. Thank you for watching. We'll see you right back here, same time tomorrow.